Word came via our unofficial channels from the political department that all the Polish inmates were to be deported somewhere out of fear of a mutiny in the camp. The authorities decided that such a concentration of Poles, whose experience made them more and more determined and ready for everything, kept on Polish ground with local support, was nothing short of dangerous. A landing of troops or a supply of weapons, this was not in the plans of the Allies, or perhaps they did not see it. The enemy, however, spotted this, and so they started to take some Poles out of the commandos and accustom the commandos to work without them. A Pole was always and invariably in any commando the best worker. The Germans were saying that Poles were as good as the Germans, but that was not true. They were ashamed to admit that a Polish worker was better than a German one. For now, only those Poles were removed from the crafting commandos whose behavior showed that they were no artisans before being brought into the camp. Out of 500 workers in Bekleidungswerkstätte, about 150 were released. I, because of my intellectual look, was chosen as well. All of this happened on February 2nd, 1943. This did not worry me at all. I firmly believed that being released on that day would bring me no ill fortune. The very next day I was working in the basket-making commando admitted there by my colleagues. It was the general custom in the camp at that point. A old number could be admitted to any commando. He was a senior in the world of the prisoners. I only worked in that commando for one day, and not for the benefit of the camp. I learnt to make improvised shoes out of straw. The day after that, I already had a great job in a newly formed commando, the packagery. As a result of the authorities' decision to allow the prisoners to receive food parcels, these parcels started to be delivered daily to the camp by trucks. This posed a problem for the authorities. One was only allowed to receive one parcel a week, no larger than 5 kilograms. Convinced that the amount of parcels would not decline, they banned giant packages, but allowed small parcels up to 250 grams to be sent without limitations. This is where they were mistaken. An enormous amount of tiny parcels arrived every day. The families, glad that they could help their imprisoned relatives, were eager to send small parcels every day instead of one big package a week. The results of the camp authorities' decision was exactly the opposite of what they sought to achieve. The immense amount of work with registering huge numbers of parcels and then giving them to the prisoners required a whole separate organization, a new commando, which I joined. 3 small rooms in Block 3 were assigned to our commando, one completely flooded with parcels. The efficiency of all the other commandos in the camp required us to make an effort to get rid of the backlog, and it would be better the prisoners too if they got their packages quickly enough. The commando had 2 shifts, 20 prisoners in each of them, working 24 hours a day. I intentionally signed up for the night shift. Because parcels were being sorted around the clock, the camp's office had to work along with us. The documents had to be prepared for every parcel. Hundreds of notes like that were sent every half an hour to the camp office. There, it was marked on which block the number the prisoner currently lived in, or marking it with a cross signifying the addressee's death. When the notes returned, the parcels were sorted out, put on shelves. Each block had its own shelf. Parcels marked with the cross were discarded onto a gigantic pyramid, piling up in another corner of the room. And there were many parcels addressed to the inmates who unfortunately died before receiving them. Except parcels sent to prisoners from the Jewish, French, or Czech transports, which were usually completely exterminated at the time, many Polish families would also send parcels, not knowing that their addressees were already dead. This was because As I have already mentioned, a notification was not always sent, or the political department waited for several months before sending one. The better quality parcels belonging to already deceased prisoners, mostly from France and Czechoslovakia, containing wine and fruit, would be taken by the SS men to their casino in baskets. The parcels which were not so appealing were usually sent to our Häftlingsküche, which was also receiving food from Canada, which the SS men had already rifled through earlier. Everything was then put into the dinner pot. We were eating sweet soups at the time, with pieces of cake and cookies in them, as if smelling with perfume. Once someone in our room found a not completely dissolved piece of soap in our soup. Sometimes the cooks would come across a golden trinket of coins at the bottom of the pot, carefully hidden by the previous, now deceased owner in a loaf of bread, in a roll, a cookie. The workers of the package commando with clear conscience were eating food from parcels addressed to those who have already died, usually giving out their bread and soup in the blocks to those who were more hungry than they were. However, one had to be very careful with eating food from the parcels belonging to the dead. Only the Übermann could do that. The prisoners were not allowed to do so under the penalty of death. One time, the search was made on those who were leaving work and revealed that 7 prisoners had white bread, butter, and sugar taken from the parcels of the dead men in their pockets. All 7 were shot dead that very day. An Austrian SS man was the chief of the commando. He was pretty reasonable for an SS man. After the original norm of 1 parcel of 5 kilograms a week had been reinstated, different sort of parcels were coming. Sometimes entire suitcases were being sent to the camp. The chief of the packagery did not question at all, giving them all to their rightful owners, not searching them in detail, only sometimes cutting the ropes due to the lack of time. But when the blockman, a German thug, took a handful of sweets from a parcel sent to a prisoner who was still alive, the chief of the packaging commando reported him to his superiors, and the blockman, even though he was a German, was shot that very day. As far as these things went, there was justice. I found another way to provide food to my hungry colleagues. I was working night shifts in the packagery. The SS-man guard, sitting in front of me, next to a warm stove, had a habit of always falling asleep around 2 a.m. There was a huge pile of parcels belonging to dead prisoners behind me, and a separate smaller pile of better quality parcels on the side, prepared for the SS-man's casino. While carrying around, registering, and moving the parcels, I used to carefully pick the packages from the other pile, with the SS guard snoring to his heart's content. I would unwrap the parcel, tear the address off, turn the paper over, wrap the parcel again, tie it with a string, and write the address of some of my colleagues within the camp. I had official authority to repack badly packed bundles. Some parcels had their wrapping completely torn, which was even better. I did not repack the parcels bearing seals, but just used to simply write a new address on a separate piece of paper and paste it onto the parcel. A package prepared in such a way then landed on its correct shelf. The SS man's job was comfortable because he slept at night, and since he had no duties during the day, he would ride his bike to his wife, who lived some 20 kilometers away. Everyone was happy with this arrangement. I tried to send at least 8 parcels a night, 2 parcels for each battalion, sometimes more, sometimes less. In the morning, I would visit the friends to whom the dead parcels were readdressed, warning them not to be surprised when they got an unknown parcel. As I had changed commandos, I was moved to Block 6. I met several colleagues whom I had recruited to our work. Second Lieutenant 164, Edmund Zabawski, Second Lieutenant 165, Henryk Szklarz, and Platoon Leader 166, identity unknown, both in the block and out at work. At the end of 1942, Oleg, 2nd Lieutenant 167 Alexander Bukowski, was brought into the camp with a whole transport from Krakow. I was informed that he was a hero from the Montelupich prison, that he had slipped death's grip by breaking out of jail, and he has 2 death sentences hanging over him. But thanks to his smart ways of managing his relationship with the SS man, he pretended to be a doctor and even treated the SS man. He somehow survived. But he was in Auschwitz now. Surely he was to meet his end here. I came to know him. I liked his sense of humor. I made him an offer to use the way of getting out of the camp that I had planned for myself, the sewers. The maps of the sewers provided to me by colleagues from the construction office described exactly the best point of entry to the sewers. Usually the German authorities only got smart after some prisoner had already used a way of breaking out. Then, using the same escape route was almost impossible. The proverb, "A Pole is wise after the damage has been done," can be perhaps extended to other nationalities as well. By giving my escape route to Oleg 167 Alexander Bukowski, I forfeited it for myself. But I was not going to flee just yet, and he was in a big danger. I could use him to send a report, and hoped to some fortunate coincidence would prove me with a way out as well. At that time, Lieutenant 168 Witold Pilecki had reported to me with a plan of escaping from the commando where he was working. He was second in command to the capo there, and when the capo fell ill, he had more freedom to act. He would take the commando to take some measurements several kilometers from the camp. I introduced 2nd Lieutenant 167 Alexander Bukowski to him. He liked 168 Witold Pilecki's plan even more, so 167 commenced preparations to leave the camp in this way. However, he moved too quickly from the packagery to the measuring commando, where 168 was working. One night in January 1943, 7 colleagues left the camp via the SS kitchen. Seeing that hanging escapees who had been caught was not an effective countermeasure, the authorities came up with a new idea. They announced to all the blocks that if a prisoner decided to escape from the camp, his family would be brought to Auschwitz in his place. That hit us right where it hurt. Nobody wanted to put his family at risk. After having returned to the camp one day, we saw 2 women, a kindly-looking elderly lady and a likable young one, standing under a pole with a sign reading, "Your fellow inmate's imprudent act has put these 2 women in jeopardy by putting them in the camp." This was supposed to be a reprisal for one of our inmates' escape. We were sensitive towards women. Initially, we condemned the thug who jeopardized his own mother and fiancée by saving his own life, but soon it turned out that the women had numbers around the 30,000 mark, while the current numbers in the women's camp were about 50,000. We came to the conclusion that these women were brought here from the camp in Rajsko and made to stand by the pole for several hours. An SS man stood guard near them so that no one could talk to them. In any case, there was no certainty that one's family would not be brought into the camp, and so other inmates could not decide to flee the camp. Colleagues 167 Alexander Bukowski and 168 Witold Pilecki were preparing an escape plan. Contact with Krakow has been established via the civilian population. Clothes and female contacts were to be prepared in several places. 167 suggested that I could leave the camp with them. While discussing their plan in more detail with 168, I realized that it was not exactly perfect. 2 SS men, who sometimes accompanied by surveying commando and who, against the explicit ban, sometimes accompanied them to the tavern to drink vodka as well, were to be made drunk and bond, and should that not work, the escapees wanted to resort to a wet job. I was opposed to this idea explicitly on behalf of the organization. Such a escape could have had potentially disastrous consequences for the prisoners staying in the camp, and the organization could not accept that. Escaping was not the difficult part. The difficult part was to flee and not cause excessively grievous harm to the camp's inmates left behind. They changed their mind and started to prepare the luminol to put the SS men to sleep. The luminol acquired from the infirmary tested on the capos was not effective when served with vodka. It did not dissolve. Instead, it left a residue at the bottom of the glass. 167 and 168 resorted to spiking sweets with luminol instead. In the meantime, more than several thousand gypsies were brought to Birkenau and put in a separate, walled-off camp, whole families for now. Later on, the men were separated from the rest, and then finished off in the Auschwitz style. One day, colleagues from Rajsko pulled off a humorous escape, dubbed by us the Barrel of Diogenes. One dark, windy, rainy night, over a dozen prisoners left the camp by using poles to separate the wires in the camp's fence and putting a regular barrel with its bottom removed, which was once used for transporting food, into the gap, thereby providing good insulation against the current and in the electrified fence. They left the camp through the barrel like cats through a muff. The authorities threw into a rage again. So many inconvenient witnesses of what was been going on in Rajsko-Birkenau free. They resolved to do everything they could to catch the fugitive. An entire army was deployed in the search, which lasted 3 days. The camp was closed for that time because there were no guards available to keep watch over the prisoners going to work. The authorities used this time to delouse the camp in 3 days. By pure coincidence, 167, Alexander Bukowski, and 168, Witold Wierusz, had their escape scheduled with the organization outside the camp, just 1 day after the Barrel of Diogenes. The lack of any possibility to leave the camp invalidated the plan, but that was not all. The chiefs of the commandos and capos alike were afraid of their angry superiors and started to search the prisoners' places of work, their belongings, and the blocks in general, looking for just about anything to make an issue of. In the packetery, the chief of the commando and the capo asked about Oleg, 167, Alexander Bukowski, who used to work here, but was nowhere to be seen right now. Was he sick? They ran to the camp's office and found out that Oleg had already moved to another block and to another commando, and because he switched jobs, moving to the field on top of that, without notifying anyone and without the Arbeitsdienst permission, while having a pretty serious case in the political department, they chose to see it as a preparation for an escape. And so, Oleg, as a punishment, was moved to SK. I had been preparing the way out via the sewers for a long time now, just in case. It was not an easy route, though. The sewage system network, as shown in the plans for the Baubureau, spread in different directions, but mostly comprised of 40 to 60 centimeter pipes. From the manhole, which was the most convenient for my plans, next to the block 12, the pipes branched out and split into 3 directions only, next to block 12, with 60 centimeter pipes going up vertically and 90 centimeter ones going horizontally. I even tried to enter and open the gate to the sewage system one time, but I was not the only one interested in the sewers. Other colleagues also knew this route and considered using it. I struck an agreement with them. They were 110, ANDRZEJ Gąsienica-Makowski, and 118, identity unknown. There were also others who had an interest in the sewers. The only question was, who was going to actually use them? Before the previous Christmas, a group of Arbeitsdienst wanted to break out from the camp, but 61, Konstanty Piekarski, was also very eager to do so. I showed this way to him, and maybe several prisoners could have actually made it that night, since, as usual, the guards were less alert. But that very evening, on Christmas Eve, a second Christmas tree was put right next to the spot where they would be getting out, flooding the area in light. Later on, when I was already working in the night commando in the factory, the sewer entrance was very close to me. I entered the stinking sewers twice, after having changed into a worker's outfit at Block 3 at night. The drainage grates with hinges used to be locked from below by 2 padlocks, now broken, submerged in mud, but above they seemed shut. From this point, the route went on in 3 different directions, and the sewage pipes were slightly broader. One pipe was laid between blocks 12 and 13, 22 and 23. Then it turned left and went next to the kitchen, and just after the last watchtower next to block 28, and slightly turned right. The exit was far behind the railway tracks. It was a very long route, about 800 meters, and it had one advantage, a safe exit, and one disadvantage, it was extremely sludgy. I crawled for only 60 meters in this pipe to test the possibility of moving inside it, and I got out of it completely exhausted. The night was pitch black. I was all dirty. I washed myself and changed my underwear in Block 3. I must admit, I got discouraged for some time. The second direction of the sewers offered a much drier option, in which it was easier to maneuver as well. It was also much shorter. The route was laid between blocks 4 and 15, 5 and 16, and then it went straight on to 10 and 21, still going forward after that. It went uphill. There was less filth and water flowing down in it from the blocks, but the exit was, unfortunately, not further than 2 meters from the watchtower. The slab covering the exit behind the fence, next to a gravel pit, even when prepared beforehand by colleagues during the day, was next to impossible to be raised without any noise alerting the guard just above it. The third option remained the shortest route, only 40 meters. It was an extension of the previous one. It contained the most water. Its course ran between blocks 1 and 12 and past the fence, between the commandant's office and a newly constructed building. The exit was right by the road, pretty well visible, especially from the main guardhouse. They put a Christmas tree here one time, but now they would not do it. There was also the so-called submarine underground with permanent staff, but I could not have included it in my plans. Eventually, I could theoretically take the risk of leaving the camp, but I still firmly believed that it would have been premature in my case. One evening, we reached the conclusion that there was a regular war being waged against us. Usually, we would get news from the political department, from the commandant's office, from the infirmary, brought by the SS men sitting on 2 stools and passing on news through the Volksdeutsches and the Reichsdeutsches working for us. Some of the SS men, formerly officers of the Polish army, made sure to let us know clearly enough that they were ready to follow us into any action, and even give us the keys to the armories. We did not need the keys, for we already had our own duplicates made by our colleagues. People of this kind, two-faced and nasty, were of use to us on many occasions, often letting us know about what the authorities wanted to do, Their information was always correct. Apparently, Grabner did not trust his closest accomplices anymore, and in seeking to achieve perfect discretion, he kept the decision and the list of candidates for departure undisclosed for as long as possible. He shared his decisions with Pilecki only. On March 7th, 1943, a Blocksperre was held in all the blocks. Lists were sent to the blocks, and the blocks were suddenly locked. They started to call out people whose numbers were to be found on these lists, exclusively Poles, ordering them to get ready for transportation. Only those whose cases had already been closed, with whom the political department had no grudge, were called out. The transports were supposed to take them to other camps, allegedly much better than Auschwitz. We found out in confidence that first transports did indeed go to better camps, but after that, they went to progressively worse ones. The mood in the rooms was mixed. Some colleagues were glad to be going to better camps, and that they were not going to be shot here. Others were worried that they were not going anywhere, which meant that their cases were not closed yet by the political department, and therefore they could still be shot. Others were very displeased by their departure because they had reached a respectable, good position after years of hard work, and they were facing the prospect of being Zugangs again, having to go through a challenging selection process again, not knowing the odds of success. The general opinion, however, was that it was worth going now because there could not be a second hell like Auschwitz anywhere anyway. Besides, nobody asked for anybody's opinion anyway. If it was during the day, if the blocks were open, perhaps something could have been done. Whoever wanted to stay could fall ill, but at night nothing could be done. I was called out the very first night, March 7th to 8th. We were told to collect our belongings and move to Block 12A, which had been vacated beforehand for the particular reason, and so we did exactly that. Block 19 was also reserved, because the numbers were called out over the course of 3 evenings, March 7th, 8th, and 9th. And our number amounted to about 6,000. We were locked in blocks 12A and 19, and only able to communicate through the windows. Dr. 2, Władysław Derling, came to the staircase and by gestures communicated through the pane in the door. He let me know that if I wanted to stay, the only way to do that was to fall ill. Considering all the underground work and my position among the inmates in our world of labor, this was some food for thought. On March 10th of 1943, they dragged us all out, grouped in 5s, to the Red Alley, already at 6 a.m. This is where the chosen prisoner's health was inspected by the committee, comprised of German military physicians. I was standing near Colonel 11, Tadeusz Reklewski, and Kazio 39, Kazimierz Radwański. My brain was working intensively, making a list, who's going, who's staying. A coherent group of reliable colleagues from work was going, and so I opted for leaving the camp as well. The physicians were genuinely oppressed by how healthy, well-fed, and fit the prisoners, mostly Poles, were, save from some Zugangs freshly brought into the camp, nodding their heads and saying, "How did they survive here?" Apart from the parcels and the Canada, it was also partially owing to the work of our organization, the results of which were clearly visible here. But my job was to secure the continuity of the work here. If I were to stay, with whom would it be? I started to discuss this matter with some colleagues. Colonel 11, Tadeusz Reklewski, and Kazio 39, Kazimierz Radwański, were happy to leave the camp. They were scheduled to go to Buchenwald, allegedly one of the better camps out there. My colleague, Colonel 11, thought it was my duty, all things considered, to stay in this hell. I had a lot of time to think about it. The inspection progressed very slowly indeed. We stood there for an entire day and part of the night. The committee had only reached us, Colonel 11 and Second Lieutenant Konstanty Piekarski, around 2 a.m. Some time ago, I decided to try to stay in Auschwitz. Thanks to colleague 169 Stanisław Barański, who was most resourceful and moved around freely, I obtained a hernia belt. Naturally, I did not have a hernia at all. At 2 a.m., the committee was already pretty tired. Colonel 11, Tadeusz Raklewski, who was much older than me and very thin in comparison to me, was counted among those able to work and admitted to the transport. But when I stood naked in front of the committee, with a hernia belt, the physicians waved their hands and said, "Weg, we don't need people like this one." And they did not take me to the transport. I marched back to Block 12A, and right after reporting my return and showing the paper confirming that I had not been admitted to the transport, I returned to Block 6, to my own bed, and the day after that, to the regular work in the packagery. On March 11th, after rejecting those unfit for labor, or those who pretended to be so, they transferred slightly over 5,000 healthy Poles from the camp. Because we, as the package commando, were given an exact list from the camp's office with the numbers of prisoners who had been transferred with the purpose of forwarding the incoming food packages addressed to them, we precisely determined that 5,000 Polish colleagues were sent to the following camps, more or less 1,000 to each: Buchenwald, Neuengamme, Flossenburg, and Grossrosen, and Sachsenhausen. The skeleton of the organization had managed to wriggle out this transport, so we kept working. A week later, on the first Sunday, we were surprised again. In order to avoid a load of work in a hurry just before sending out the transport, they decided to do everything calmly beforehand. On all the blocks in the entire camp, all remaining Poles had to face on that day the medical committee, which was marking people with either A, meaning able to work, or U, unable to work. These categories were to be permanent. It was a surprise because it would potentially render all the tricks that we had played up to that point useless. I was thinking what to do with myself. To get an A would mean having to go to another camp in the next transport, and to get a worse camp at that, as I did not go to better ones. To get a U, well, they said that those with the letter would be sent to Dachau, where the conditions in the infirmary were better, but knowing our camp authorities, I would have rather expected the gas and chimney treatment being prepared for those with a U. I had to find a solution. Anyway, I decided not to put the belt on. The committee did not look at me too close and released me, putting a letter A next to my number in the register. I looked good. The German military physicians, looking at the fit bodies of the Polish prisoners, also this time could not resist expressing their bewilderment. What a regiment they could form. Now being scheduled for departure from the camp, I had to do something, as I did not want to be sent to one of those worse camps, as I did not go to the better ones. The SS men, chiefs of the commandos responsible for some aspect of the labor system, were very eager to advertise the Polish master workers. They always preferred to work with the Poles, as the Poles excelled in their trades. It was, however, not easy at that time because of the camp authorities' orders. Being an expert in sorting parcels was not really an option either. But somehow I managed to pass as just that, thanks to Dr. 2, Władysław Dering, and colleague 149, identity unknown. I was proclaimed along with 4 other people by the chief of the commando as an absolutely necessary worker. I was not made to join the new transport to Mauthausen, which left over the course of 2 days, April 11th and 12th, 1943. They shipped out 2,500 Poles. All in all, they transferred 7,500 healthy Poles in March and April of that year. It was then that I decided my further stay here was getting too hard for me. After more than 2.5 years of work, I would have to start the work from scratch, building a network all over again with new people. On April 13th, before noon, I went to the basement of Block 17, where, in a small, separate room, Captain 159, Stanisław Machowski, from the Warsaw HQ, was working. I knew his posture because Second Lieutenant Stasiek 156, Stanisław Wierzbicki, already dead at that time, and Major 85, Zygmunt Bogdanowski, showed him to me a couple of times, but I did not have the opportunity to talk to him personally since he was being looked after by a member of our organization, 138, identity unknown. I talked to him for the first time. I said, "I've been here for 2 years and 7 months. I have supervised the work here. I have not been given any new orders as of late. The Germans have already transferred the best people I worked with. I would have to start all over again. I think that prolonging my stay here is pointless, and therefore I'm leaving." Captain 159 Stanisław Machowski looked at me, perplexed, and said, "Well, yes, I understand. But can one come to Auschwitz and leave it just like that whenever one wants?" "One can," I replied. From that point onwards, all of my effort was focused on finding the most suitable way out of the camp. I talked to Major 85, Zygmunt Bogdanowski, who was pretending to be ill and in the infirmary under Dr. II's Władysław Derling's care, and this way he managed to avoid being transported someplace else. They were not moving the ill ones just yet. However, he was given the A category. Before I left, I managed to secure his position in the packagery. I came to him as he knew the local areas around Auschwitz really well, and asked where would he go and which direction did he advise me to take. Zygmunt looked at me in disbelief and said, "If someone else came to me with these questions, I'd think they're surely mocking me, but since it's you, I believe you. I'd head to Trzebinia, Chrzanów." I showed him a map of the areas surrounding Auschwitz, scale 1 to 100,000, acquired by 76 Bernard Świerczyna. I intended to head towards Kęty. We bid each other farewell. I entrusted him, Bogdan, with the command in case of some action erupting. I went to my colleague 59, Henryk Bartosiewicz, and transferred the command of the organizational side of the entire operation over to him. With the support and succor of the brave, approachable Colonel 121, Juliusz Gilewicz, who was the official head of the entire operation, and a colleague, 59. Now I simply had to get out, and for real. There's always a difference between saying that one's doing something and actually doing it. For years now I had been working on merging these two things together, but above all, I was a believer, and I had faith that I would leave the camp for sure, if only God helped me do so. There was also another reason to speed up my decision. Dr. II, Władysław Dering, told me, he himself, having found out from the Zugangs who came from the Pawiak, that 161 Bolesław Kuczbara, who had escaped from Auschwitz with the Arbeitsdienst, got caught in Warsaw and was currently being imprisoned in Pawiak. I distrusted this man deeply because of the rumors about his past and because of his unscrupulous collecting gold crowns from dead people, and also because of the story with the diplomas, which he had painted for the underground work for Colonel 121, Juliusz Gilewicz, and 59, Henryk Bartosiewicz. I understood it would not be out of character for him to save his own skin by collaborating with the Germans and telling them about what he had seen in the camp. I discussed this topic with Dr. II, Władysław Dering, colleague 59, Henryk Bartosiewicz, and colleague 106, identity unknown. And I was convinced that those known to 161 as members of the organization, all high-ranking members, needed to leave. In mid-March, my colleague and friend 164, Edmund Zabawski, informed me that one of our colleagues, I only knew him from seeing him occasionally here and there, Jacek 170, ANDRZEJ, wanted to leave the camp. So if I had any reports I would like to send, I could use him. I had met Jacek, ANDRZEJ, and immediately came to like him. I liked his constantly grinning face, broad shoulders, and straightforward honesty. In other words, a first-rate companion. I told him about my plans regarding using the sewers as the final solution and asked him about his approach. He answered that, as he had been going with the Rollwagen to the town for bread, he had seen the civilian bakers' bikes parked by the bakery many times. If he could not only do it in any other way, he would just take a bike and ride on, hoping for the best. I told him that, in my opinion, it was not a good idea. After some time, he came back to me with news. There was a huge, heavy, and reinforced door in the bakery, and if one could get to the bakery, one could also perhaps open the door, for it had two wings. In order to take a closer look, Jacek moved to the bakery for a couple of days, with the permission of the capo of his own commando, Brotablandung Commando, under the pretense of wanting to eat some more bread. Jacek weighed 96 kilograms at the time. Capo liked him as an old and cheerful worker. It was the end of March. After 5 days in the bakery, Jacek returned rather crestfallen. Work in the bakery was very hard. After just 5 days of work, he lost 6 kilograms due to profuse sweating and weighed only 90 kilograms. But what was even worse, he noticed that the door could not be opened. A powerful lock attached to one wing and a slab in the other when locked with a key. Perhaps it would not be an insurmountable obstacle if we could remove the 4 bolts in both doors. But there was also a hook on the outside, which, upon closing the door, held both wings together. Hard work and this hook discouraged Jacek. Therefore, for some time, we did not talk about the bakery at all, instead shifting our focus of interest back to the sewers. 2 innovations were introduced at the camp at the time. In the first years, we used to have 3 roll calls a day. Prolonged roll calls with stand-ups were common, quiet ways of finishing people off, along with some other brutal and primitive methods. A change had occurred since then, a change to more cultured ways of murdering people. Thousands were killed every day with gas and injections of fennel, and about 8,000 people were brought daily into the camp. In this cultural advance, having rejected beating people with a rod, they decided that it was nothing short of ridiculous to keep killing people silently with stand-ups, as the results were pitiful in comparison with the gas chambers, which were also just as silent. And in 1942, the midday roll calls were thus cancelled. The camp only had 2 roll calls from this time. On Sundays, as usual, there was only 1 roll call, at 10:30 a.m. Now, in the spring of 1943, the next innovation was the cancellation of yet another roll call, the morning one, and issuing civilian clothing to the prisoners. There were hundreds of thousands of sets of civilian clothes available, left behind by those who had been gassed. A prisoner working in the camp with the wire had the right to wear civilian apparel with vertical red stripes on the back, at the waist, and on the trousers. Nobody working outside the camp, except for the capos and under-capos, had the right to wear these civilian clothes. Anyway, the difference between then and now was huge. Now we were sleeping on bunk beds covered with fluffy blankets from Canada, left behind by the people who had been brought here from Holland to be gassed. Those staying in the camp were wearing civilian clothes of excellent quality, made of wool, marred by these bright stripes, and going to work like office clerks, without having to stand at attention intermittently at roll call. The lunch breaks were not disturbed by any roll calls or stand-ups either. Only the evening roll calls remained, and these were not too annoying by then either. We did not stand there for too long. Even on the day when 3 colleagues were declared missing from the infirmary, there was no stand-up as a repercussion. The fugitives were looked for scrupulously because the authorities did not want to have any witnesses at large. They put a lot of effort into drastically altering the horrifying opinion about Auschwitz, which had already gained currency outside. They announced that the camp was to be renamed from a concentration camp to an Arbeitslager. No physical violence was to be seen at this point, at least not in the Stammlager. I was comparing the pictures I remembered from 1940 and 1941, and I just could not believe that these were the same walls and the same people that were surrounding me. I remember the winter of 1940-1941, with a SS man in the presence of several people, suddenly flying into a rage and murdering 2 prisoners, and then turning to us upon seeing our stare fixed at him, as if in a need to justify himself, blurting out, "Das ist ein Vernichtungslager." Now, they were trying to erase these horrible memories from our minds in any possible way. How are they going to erase the memories of gas chambers and 6 crematoria, I wonder? The attitude toward those caught while trying to flee did not change, though. 2 more people were hanged in the square, serving as a grim warning to any potential imitators. We looked at each other with ANDRZEJ, our eyes saying, "Oh, well, so what? Both sides will be trying their best, will be trying to leave. Let them try to catch us." Once Jacek had rested a bit after his several days of trial work in the bakery, I asked him if it would be possible to remove his damned hook from the door. Jacek explained that it would be possible indeed, as the hook was attached to the wall by a big bolt from the outside. On the following days, Jacek, going back and forth with bread between the camp and the bakery, made an imprint of the screw's head in a piece of bread and of the key to the padlock on the window to the bakery's warehouse, used for storing the freshly baked loaves. On the basis of the imprint, a spanner was made by an acquaintance of Jacek, a locksmith at Industriehof 1. The key to the padlock was made by a former colleague of mine from the TAP in Warsaw, Ensign 28, Szczepan Rzeczkowski. Both keys were ready within 24 hours. Jacek was able to carefully check whether they worked. The key to the padlock was made just in case, because according to Jacek, it was impossible to open the window just slightly. But from having the tools prepared to actually leaving the camp, it was a long way. It was but a small step on a long road. Firstly, we would both have to have a job in the bakery, and for me, it would have to be only for a short time, as they were sure to notice I am no baker, and this because all the jobs for the beasts of burden carrying sacks of flour were already taken, and guarded jealously by those who pretended to be bakers. Besides, my stay at the bakery would have to be really short indeed, and remain undiscovered by the authorities of the packagery, because it was not that long ago since they declared me to be a crucial member of the team and advertised as such. An arbitrary change of a commando was always seen in the camp's authorities as a preparation for escape, especially when it involved abandoning a good commando such as this. It was a good way of securing one's detention in the SK, as was the case with Oleg 167, Alexander Bukowski. After spending some time on pondering the ways to defeat the obstacles on my way to the bakery, I shifted my thoughts to the sewers, but they also presented a bundle of similar difficulties, and so I was always coming back to the bakery. Eventually, we, Jacek and I, decided that we would not take the way through the bakery, to conquer all the remaining barriers to get there from the night shift, and, at least for me, only for one night and no longer. This was the plan that had to be executed, without saying a word to anyone. For now, not even to Jacek, I approached 92, Wacław Weszke, whose colleague was at Arbeitsdienst now, having replaced Mietek Mieczysław Januszewski. Thanks to him, without disclosing the actual purpose of my move, I solved the matter of moving Jasio to the bakery by saying that he is actually a baker by trade, and he has been simply changing commandos without end, without really knowing why, and because he is such an old number, one could perhaps actually do something about it. Jacek came to me the following day, saying that he did not know how it happened, but he was summoned to work in the bakery, that the capo was upset because of his departure, but has somehow accepted the fact. I told him where the note summoning him to the bakery came from, and Jacek went to the bakery to work there on a permanent basis. After a few days, he was already an old baker. The bakery's capo, a Czech, was impressed by Jacek's humor and strength and made him his second-in-command, the Untercapo, and gladly agreed to take the day shifts, leaving the night shifts to Jacek. There were only several days until Easter. We decided to use the holidays as a period during which the SS men, capos, and all other kinds of camp authorities were somewhat more at ease and less alert because of the influence of vodka. In the old days, a capo who had been caught smelling of vodka would have been imprisoned in the bunker by Fritz or Almayer, but times had changed, and just like it was now officially prohibited to drink vodka under the threat of the bunker, it was prohibited, and the punishment was not just the bunker, but SK, to have any dealings with women, and yet even that ban was relaxed a little bit. Not only the SS men, but also the prisoners had contacts with German women in SS uniforms, who formed the authorities of the female part of the camp, and who had been recruited usually from the ranks of streetwalkers. Sometimes one could see the prisoners on their way back to the camp communicating in a meaningful way with some SS women. Some percentage of those using this opportunity was sometimes caught, and many prisoners, usually capos or blockmen, were then put in the bunker, only avoiding the SK thanks to their reputation with the authorities. For example, Blockman 171, identity unknown, was imprisoned in the bunker for having engaged in offenses like these. Now, due to much easier discipline in the camp, some prisoners started regular relationships with women. Couples were formed, along with entire romantic backgrounds. The SS men were not free from these kinds of offenses. For several months now, one could see a picture that would have been unthinkable in the past. SS men walking out of the bunker in Block 11, twice a day, without belts, for a half an hour's walk, punished for having intercourses with women. As a general rule, the punishment for consorting with women of the inferior race was much greater for the SS men, a penal colony dedicated for SS men. Pilecki himself was sent there for many years for his contacts with a Jewish girl, Kati, identity unknown. But that did not happen until much later. For now, less severe punishments were meted out, like the bunker, or sometimes they could even go unpunished. Still, it required secrecy, and the careful selection of women in the Reichsgruppe by the SS men was a secret guarded closely even by the SS men themselves. Even the camp commandant's conscience was not completely clean. He had been afflicted by the gold rush. He would very carefully collect gold, precious gems, and other valuable items in cahoots with Erik Grunke from the tannery shop. Should he dare to dish out any more severe punishment to one of his subordinates, a vengeful SS man could retaliate by reporting the commandant's misconducts. For that reason, he tried to remain almost blind and deaf to his subordinates' offenses. A prisoner's gold rush, however, was always a guarantee of his death, because after his interrogation in the bunker and searches in the places he disclosed during his interrogation, the SS men usually finished him off to get rid of the witness to the amounts of gold they collected from him. Here, everyone died, regardless of their nationality. This is where two German thugs, the blockmen of Block 22A, and Capo, Walter, identity unknown, died as well. Second Lieutenant 164, Edmund Zabawski, initially wanted to go home with us, but changed his mind, fearing for his family's safety. He gave us the address of his family in town, Gdzie, Bochnia. He wrote them a letter, discreetly informing about the expected arrival of his acquaintances. He also gave us the password and contact information to the underground organization in Gdzie, Bochnia. I moved to the day shift in the packagery. Easter came on April 25th that year, 1943. The weather was beautiful and sunny, just like everything spring, seeing the grass grow rapidly and blossom appearing on the trees strengthened the desire to finally break free. On Easter Saturday, April 24th, in the packagery, I kept complaining about a headache since morning. Nobody knew that my head did not know how to hurt. I did not go back to work in the afternoon, and while staying in the block, I complained about my joints and calves hurting as well. When the blockman, a pretty calm German, always polite towards the workers of the packagery, heard me talking to the room foreman about my distress, describing these rather characteristic symptoms, he said with concern, "Du hast Fleckfieber. Gehe schnell zum Krankenbau." I pretended to be very reluctant to do so, and in the end got myself to the infirmary, making a fuss about it. Near the infirmary, I encountered Edek 57, Edward Ciesielski. I told him that I needed to get into the infirmary right that day, preferably into the typhoid block. He was a warehouse worker there, provided that he would be able to secure my unofficial admittance and release a couple of days later. Edek did not ponder the matter too deeply. He always went at full steam ahead. The admissions desk was unavailable on Easter Saturday afternoon. Edek himself attended to all the paperwork necessary for my admittance to the infirmary, through the ambulance, Block 28, to the typhoid block, and, benefiting from the lack of personnel, he admitted me as a patient himself. In bypassing the regular procedure of bathing the patient and taking his belongings away, he put me in a separate room on the ground floor. I undressed, leaving my things under his colleague's watchful eye. Then Edek led me to the room full of patients on the ground floor. 172, Janusz Młynarski, was the foreman of this room. A spare bed was found, and Edek passed me on to 172, Janusz Młynarski's care, who remembered me from my struggles with typhoid. He thought that my typhoid returned, but since I did not look sick at all, he nodded his head and asked no questions. I shook Edek's hand with gratitude and told him that I needed to leave in the morning in 2 days. On Sunday, the first day of Easter, the bakery was closed, but it was going to work on Monday. I needed to leave the infirmary and rejoin work on Monday because my appearance would not be as obvious at that time, a psychological moment, and it would raise no suspicions that some change in personnel might have taken place over the holidays. I spent the Saturday night in Block 20 and had beautiful dreams. I entered a shed of some kind where a beautiful horse stood. If I were not a cavalryman and did not know the colors of horses, I would have said that it was white as milk. I quickly saddled the horse, which was dancing on the spot. Someone gave me a saddle cloth, and I said, "Don't disturb me, I'm busy." I adjusted the girth with my teeth, a habit from 1919-1920. I mounted the horse and left the shed, and oh, how much I had yearned for a horse already. Easter Sunday, I was still lying in bed in Block 20. Edek drops in from time to time to ask me if I need anything. In the afternoon, I decided to have a certain conversation with Edek. He was brought here as a young lad, and after 2 years in Auschwitz, was almost 20 years old. They caught him with a pistol in his pocket. He thought that he was not going to make it. He kept telling me, "Tomasz Serafiński, I could only count on you." So on Sunday afternoon, I told him, "Edek, it's simple. I'm leaving the camp because you have admitted me to HKB unofficially without all the formalities, and you're going to let me out tomorrow, disregarding the procedures yet again, without the quarantine, and not to Block 6 where I came from, but to Block 15. Who's going to be held responsible once I'm gone? You are. And so, how about you coming with me?" Edek only needed a couple of minutes to think. He did not even ask about the route. He said that we were going together.